The letter of dismissal trembled in Penelope Walsh's hands as she stood outside the grand Denver mansion where she had worked for 3 years, her few belongings stuffed into a worn carpetbag at her feet. Mrs. Hartwell had not even had the decency to hand her the dismissal personally, instead sending it down with the housekeeper along with instructions that Penelope was to vacate the premises immediately, and without reference for what the letter coldly described as gross incompetence and suspected theft, neither of which was remotely true. It was early September 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Penelope's uncovered head as she stood on the dusty street corner trying to decide what to do next. She had exactly 73 cents to her name, no family to return to after her parents had died of fever 5 years prior, and no prospects whatsoever without a reference letter. The accusation of theft would follow her like a shadow, making employment in any respectable household nearly impossible. She had not stolen anything. What had actually happened was that Mrs. Hartwell's spoiled nephew had made increasingly inappropriate advances toward Penelope over the past month, and when she had finally rejected him outright 2 days ago, he had retaliated by planting his aunt's pearl brooch in Penelope's room and claiming he saw her take it. Mrs. Hartwell had believed her precious nephew without question, and that was that. Penelope was 22 years old, alone in the world, and now destitute. She walked slowly toward the train station, her mind racing through possibilities that grew bleaker with each step. She could not afford lodging for more than a night or two, and finding work without references seemed impossible. Perhaps she could travel somewhere smaller, somewhere her reputation had not been destroyed, and hope to find employment based purely on her word and her willingness to work hard. At the station, she studied the departure board with desperate intensity. Her limited funds would not take her far. The ticket agent, a balding man with kind eyes, noticed her distress. "Where are you headed, miss?" he asked gently. "I need to go somewhere I can find work," Penelope said, her voice catching despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Somewhere small, where people might be willing to give someone a chance based on character rather than letters of reference." The ticket agent considered this. "Well, there are mining towns up in Idaho that are always needing workers of all kinds. Not fancy work, mind you, but honest work. Shoshone is a growing town, lots of opportunity there. It is not as wild as some of the other places, got some civilization to it, but still frontier enough that folks care more about whether you can do a job than where you came from." Penelope's heart lifted slightly. Idaho sounded far enough away from Denver and Mrs. Hartwell's vindictive nephew. "How much for a ticket to Shoshone?" "That would be 65 cents, miss." It would leave her with 8 cents to her name, but what choice did she have? Staying in Denver meant certain ruin. At least in a frontier town, she might have a fighting chance. "I will take it," she said firmly, sliding her precious coins across the counter. The journey to Shoshone took 2 days, during which Penelope survived on stale bread she purchased with her remaining pennies and water from the stops along the way. She arrived exhausted, hungry, and uncertain, stepping off the train into a town that was indeed a mixture of frontier roughness and emerging civilization. The main street was unpaved but lined with wooden sidewalks, and the buildings ranged from hastily constructed saloons to a proper brick bank and a whitewashed church. Penelope had no plan beyond finding work immediately. She made her way down the main street, stopping at the general store, the hotel, the restaurant, and every business establishment she could find. Each time she explained honestly that she had experience in household management and cooking, that she was hardworking and reliable, but that she had no reference letter due to a misunderstanding with her previous employer. Each time, she was met with polite but firm refusals. By late afternoon, Penelope was fighting back tears of frustration and fear. She had nowhere to sleep, no money for food, and apparently no prospects whatsoever. She was sitting on a bench outside the general store, trying to gather her courage to try again, when a large shadow fell across her. She looked up to find herself face to face with quite possibly the biggest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his worn flannel shirt, were corded with muscle built from years of hard physical labor. He had dark brown hair that fell past his collar, slightly shaggy but clean, and a thick beard that could not hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes were a striking pale blue, startling against his sun-bronzed skin, and they studied her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "You are the woman who has been asking for work all over town," he said. It was not a question, but a statement, delivered in a deep voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Penelope straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated despite her desperate circumstances. "I am. Do you have work available?" "Maybe." He crossed his arms over his massive chest, the movement making his already impressive muscles flex visibly. "Name is Caleb Donovan. I have a cabin up in the mountains, about 10 miles from here. I hunt, trap, prospect a little, guide when the occasion calls for it. I make a decent living, but the cabin is a disaster. I cannot cook worth a damn, and I am tired of living like an animal in a cave. I need someone who can manage a household, cook proper meals, keep things clean and organized." Hope flared in Penelope's chest, bright and urgent. "I can do all of those things. I worked in a large household in Denver for 3 years, managing the kitchen and household staff, planning meals, keeping accounts. I'm an excellent cook and very organized." "Where is your reference letter?" Caleb asked bluntly. Penelope's hope wavered but did not die. She looked him straight in the eye and told him the truth. "I do not have one. My employer dismissed me based on false accusations made by her nephew after I rejected his advances. She would not hear my side of the story, and I was turned out without a reference or my final wages. I came to Shoshone because I needed to start fresh somewhere. People might be willing to judge me on my abilities rather than on lies." She expected him to walk away like everyone else had. Instead, Caleb continued to study her with those penetrating blue eyes, as if he could see straight through to her soul and read the truth written there. "You telling me the truth?" he asked finally. "I swear it on my parents' graves," Penelope said firmly. "I am not a thief, and I am not incompetent. I am a hard worker who was treated unjustly, and all I am asking for is a chance to prove my worth." Caleb was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharply. "All right then, I will hire you on your word. Trial period of 1 month. If you work out, the job is yours permanently. I will pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and treat you with respect. In return, I expect honest work and no drama. Deal?" Penelope could scarcely believe what she was hearing. This complete stranger, this mountain man who looked like he could wrestle bears for entertainment, was willing to give her a chance when no one else would. "Deal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. You will not regret this." "Call me Caleb," he said gruffly, "and I had better not regret it. Come on, we need to get supplies before we head up the mountain. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Penelope admitted. Caleb's expression darkened. "First stop is the restaurant. You cannot work if you faint from hunger." 20 minutes later, Penelope was seated across from Caleb in the town's small restaurant, trying not to devour her plate of roast beef and potatoes too quickly despite her ravenous hunger. Caleb ate his own meal steadily, and she noticed that people in the restaurant gave him respectful nods and a wide berth. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" she asked between bites. "About 5 years now," Caleb replied. "Came out west after the war. Tried city living for a while, but it did not suit me. Found I preferred the mountains, the quiet, the honest work. Built my cabin, established my territory, made a life for myself." "You live alone all that time?" "Mostly. I come into town every few weeks for supplies and company, but yes, I live alone. It has suited me until recently, but I'm getting tired of the mess and the terrible food." He gave her a look that might have been the beginning of a smile beneath all that beard. "Plus, I am not getting any younger. Time to have a proper home instead of just a place to sleep between hunts." After the meal, Caleb took Penelope to the general store, where he purchased an impressive array of supplies, including fabric for curtains and dish towels, which surprised her. He also bought her a warm coat, sturdy boots, and work dresses, refusing her protests. "You cannot work in what you are wearing now," he said practically. "Consider it an advance on your wages." They left Shoshone in the late afternoon, Caleb driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. Penelope sat beside him on the bench seat, her new belongings packed carefully with the supplies in the wagon bed. As they climbed into the foothills and then higher into the mountains, the landscape transformed into something wild and beautiful that took Penelope's breath away. The September air grew cooler and cleaner with each mile, scented with pine and earth. Eagles soared overhead, and in the distance, mountain peaks still held patches of snow from the previous winter. The wagon trail was rough but clearly well maintained, winding between massive pines and alongside rushing streams. "It is beautiful up here," Penelope said softly. It is," Caleb agreed. "Harsh in winter but beautiful year-round. You will need to be tough to handle it, though. Winter comes early and stays late this high up." "I am tougher than I look," Penelope assured him. Caleb glanced at her, taking in her slender frame and delicate features. "I suppose we will find out." The cabin came into view as the sun was beginning to set, and Penelope had to suppress a gasp at the state of it. The structure itself was solid, well built from hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. But the inside, which Caleb showed her with obvious embarrassment, was indeed a disaster. Dirty dishes were piled everywhere. The floor had not been swept in what appeared to be months. Animal pelts were draped over every surface in various states of being prepared for sale, and the whole place smelled of wood smoke, leather, and unwashed mail. "I told you it was bad," Caleb said defensively. Penelope rolled up her sleeves. "It is nothing that cannot be fixed with hard work. Show me where things are, and I will start getting organized." Over the next several hours, Caleb helped her locate cleaning supplies, cooking equipment, and basic necessities while also showing her around the property. In addition to the main cabin, there was a sturdy barn for the horses, a smokehouse, a root cellar dug into the hillside, and a chicken coop that currently held no chickens. "I never bothered with chickens," Caleb admitted. "Seemed like too much trouble." "Fresh eggs would be wonderful," Penelope said. "Perhaps we could get some when you next go to town." They worked side by side until full dark, and Penelope was impressed by how willing Caleb was to help, despite clearly being uncomfortable with domestic tasks. He hauled water without complaint, moved furniture when she asked, and even attempted to wash dishes, though his technique left much to be desired. "You hunt and trap, I cook and clean," Penelope said with gentle humor. "We each have our skills." "Fair enough," Caleb rumbled. By the time they stopped for the night, the cabin already looked significantly better. Caleb showed Penelope to a small bedroom off the main room that he had clearly hastily cleaned out for her. "This is yours," he said. "Door has a lock. I sleep in the loft. Outhouse is behind the cabin, and there's a pump for fresh water on the side of the house." "Thank you," Penelope said sincerely, "for all of this, for taking a chance on me." Caleb looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just prove me right about trusting you, and we will call it even." "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Caleb." Penelope woke before dawn the next morning, years of household management having trained her to rise early. She dressed in one of her new work dresses, braided her long brown hair, and emerged from her room to find Caleb already up and building up the fire in the large stone fireplace. "Morning," he grunted. "Good morning. What time do you normally eat breakfast?" "Whenever I remember to eat, which is not always first thing," Caleb admitted. Penelope shook her head. "That explains some things. A proper breakfast is important, especially for someone doing physical work. I will have something ready within the hour." She explored the kitchen area more thoroughly in the growing light, taking inventory of what Caleb had and what he needed. He had basic supplies, but nothing was organized, and much was past its prime. She made mental notes while starting coffee and mixing batter for pancakes using the fresh supplies they had bought in town. Caleb watched her work from where he sat at the rough-hewn table, his expression unreadable. "You move around a kitchen like you know what you are doing." "I should hope so after all these years," Penelope replied, pouring batter onto the griddle she had scrubbed clean the night before. "My mother taught me to cook when I was young, and I refined my skills working in the Hartwell household. Mrs. Hartwell may have been unjust, but she did keep an excellent kitchen." "Her loss is my gain, I suppose," Caleb said. They ate breakfast together as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Caleb consumed an impressive quantity of pancakes and bacon, and Penelope felt a deep satisfaction at seeing him eat a proper meal. "I need to check my trap lines today," Caleb said as he drained his third cup of coffee. "I will be gone most of the day. You all right here on your own?" "Perfectly fine," Penelope assured him. "I have plenty to keep me busy." After Caleb departed, Penelope threw herself into the enormous task of transforming the cabin into a proper home. She started by finishing the dishes, then moved on to sweeping and scrubbing the floors. She organized the kitchen, discarding anything spoiled and arranging everything else in a logical manner. She took down all the animal pelts and relocated them to the barn where they belonged. She washed windows, beat rugs, aired out bedding, and worked until her arms ached and her back protested. But with each task completed, the cabin became more livable, more like a home and less like a temporary camp. Caleb returned as the sun was setting, carrying several rabbits and a string of fish. He stopped dead in the doorway, staring at the transformation. "Is this the same cabin?" he asked, genuine wonder in his voice. Penelope felt a flush of pride. "It is. I still have much to do, but it's a start." Caleb walked through slowly, taking in the clean floors, the organized kitchen, the windows that actually let in light. "It is amazing. I forgot it could look like this." "Well, remember it," Penelope said tartly, "because I intend to keep it this way." Over the following days, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Caleb would rise early and go about his work, hunting, trapping, chopping wood, maintaining the property, and doing the 100 other tasks required to survive in the mountains. Penelope would manage the household, preparing meals, keeping everything clean and organized, mending clothes, and gradually imposing order on every aspect of domestic life. They ate meals together, and during these times, Penelope learned more about the quiet, intense man who had taken a chance on her. Caleb had grown up in Missouri, joined the Union Army at 18, and spent 4 years fighting in the Civil War. He did not talk much about those years, but Penelope could see the shadows in his eyes when the subject came up. "After the war, I tried to go back to normal life," he told her one evening over dinner. "Worked in a factory in St. Louis for 2 years. But I felt trapped, suffocated by walls and noise and crowds. I needed space, needed quiet, needed to feel like I was living instead of just existing. So I came west and never looked back." "Do you miss anything about civilization?" Penelope asked. Caleb considered this. "Sometimes I miss music. There used to be a saloon in St. Louis where a woman played piano most nights, beautiful music that made you feel things. But that is about it. Everything else I need, I have here." Penelope found herself sharing things with Caleb that she had never told anyone. About losing her parents, about the loneliness of working in a household where she was neither family nor friend to anyone, about the fear and humiliation of being falsely accused and dismissed without recourse. "People like Mrs. Hartwell think those of us who work for them are somehow less than human," she said bitterly one night. "That our word means nothing, that we have no feelings or dignity to be injured." "Her loss," Caleb said simply. "Any fool could see you are worth 10 of her spoiled nephew." The simple faith in his words warmed something deep in Penelope's chest. As September gave way to October, Penelope became increasingly comfortable in her mountain home. Caleb brought her chickens from town, and she tended them carefully, delighting in fresh eggs every morning. He also brought her seeds for a late-season garden, and though she knew they would not have much time before frost, she planted them hopefully. She also began to notice things about Caleb that had nothing to do with his skills as a provider. The way his rare smiles transformed his entire face, the gentleness in his strong hands when he helped her with some heavy task, the intelligence in those blue eyes that observed everything but said little. And she could not help but notice his physical presence. Caleb was a powerfully built man, all muscle and strength honed by years of hard living. When he chopped wood, she found herself watching the flex and play of muscles beneath his shirt. When he lifted heavy sacks of grain as if they weighed nothing, she felt an unfamiliar flutter in her stomach. For his part, Caleb seemed increasingly aware of her as well. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. He became more careful about his appearance, keeping his hair and beard neater, changing into clean shirts for dinner. He brought her small gifts from town, a packet of flower seeds, a book of poetry, a length of ribbon in a blue that matched her eyes. "I thought you might like this," he would say gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with the gesture but making it anyway. One evening in late October, Penelope was preparing dinner when Caleb came in from chopping wood. Instead of his usual routine of cleaning up outside, he lingered in the kitchen, watching her work. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. Are you happy here?" The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. "I know it is not what you are used to, being isolated up here with just me for company. If you are miserable, I would rather know now. Penelope turned to face him fully, setting down her wooden spoon. Caleb, I am happier here than I have been in years, maybe ever. I have meaningful work, a beautiful home, and someone who treats me with respect and kindness. Why would you think I was miserable? You are educated, refined, used to society and culture, Caleb said, gesturing helplessly. I'm a rough mountain man who can barely string 2 sentences together. I just thought maybe you were making the best of a bad situation. Penelope crossed the space between them without thinking, reaching out to touch his arm. The muscle was solid beneath her fingers, radiating warmth through the fabric of his shirt. You are not a bad situation, she said firmly. You are the best thing that has happened to me. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You treat me like an equal, not a servant. You make me feel safe and valued. Do not ever think you are somehow less because you choose to live differently than city people. Caleb looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, became more intense. Penelope, he said, his voice dropping even lower than usual. The way he said her name made her breath catch. They stood there for a long moment, awareness crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Then Caleb deliberately stepped back, breaking the contact. I should wash up before dinner, he said roughly. I will be right back. After he left, Penelope leaned against the kitchen counter, her heart pounding. She could not deny it any longer. What she felt for Caleb had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. She was falling in love with him, with his quiet strength and his unexpected kindness, with the way he made her feel both protected and free. But she had no idea if he felt the same way, or if she was simply a convenient solution to his domestic problems. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that transformed the world into a wonderland of white. Penelope woke to find everything covered in a thin blanket of snow that sparkled like diamonds in the early morning sun. Caleb found her standing on the porch, wrapped in her coat, staring at the beauty of it. First mountain snow, he said, coming to stand beside her. What do you think? It is magical, Penelope breathed. Wait until February when we have 6 feet of it and you are going stir-crazy from being snowed in, Caleb said, but there was warmth in his voice. But yes, the first snow is always special. As the weather grew colder, Penelope and Caleb necessarily spent more time together indoors. In the evenings, after dinner and chores were done, they would sit by the fire and talk or read. Caleb was working his way through a book on geology, fascinated by the mountains he called home. Penelope had discovered he owned a surprising number of books, accumulated over the years and carefully preserved. I may not be educated formal-like, he told her, but I like to learn. Books are good company on long winter nights. One particularly cold evening, they were sitting closer than usual to the fire, sharing its warmth. Penelope was mending one of Caleb's shirts, and he was oiling his hunting rifle, both engaged in comfortable, companionable silence. Your month trial period is up, Caleb said suddenly. Penelope's hands stilled on the fabric. She had not been keeping track, too absorbed in the rhythms of their life together. I suppose it is. You've been here 6 weeks now, Caleb continued, not looking at her, focused intently on his rifle. You have done everything you promised and more. The cabin has never been cleaner or more comfortable. I have never eaten better. You work harder than anyone I have ever known, so if you want the job permanently, it is yours. Relief flooded through Penelope, though she had not realized she was worried about being dismissed until the threat was removed. I want it. I want to stay. Good. Caleb finally looked up, meeting her eyes. Because I want you to stay too, more than I probably should. The last part was said so quietly, Penelope almost missed it. What does that mean? Caleb set down his rifle carefully. It means that somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my housekeeper. You became important to me. Essential. And I do not know what to do about that. Penelope's heart was racing again. Caleb, I need you to be clearer. Important how? Important like I think about you all day when I'm out on the trap lines. Like I rush through my work so I can get back and see you sooner. Like the idea of you leaving makes me feel like someone reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I am no good at pretty words, Penelope, but I think I am falling in love with you, and I do not want to scare you away by saying so." Joy burst through Penelope like sunrise. She set aside her mending and moved to kneel in front of where Caleb sat, taking his large, calloused hands in her smaller ones. "You are not scaring me away," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You are giving me everything I have been afraid to hope for, because I am falling in love with you too, Caleb Donovan, with your kindness and your strength and your gentle heart. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle despite the strength in those fingers. "I do not feel like I saved you. I feel like you saved me. I was just existing up here, not really living. Then you came and made everything better, brighter. You made this cabin into a home. You made my life worth living again." Then he was kissing her, and Penelope was kissing him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the contact. His beard was softer than she had imagined, and he tasted like the coffee they had drunk after dinner. The kiss was gentle but intense, full of promise and restrained passion. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly," he said. "I want to marry you, Penelope. I want you to be my wife, not my housekeeper. But I know that's asking a lot. This is an isolated life, and I'm not an easy man. If you need time to think about it, I understand." "I do not need time," Penelope said firmly. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you. I will gladly be your wife." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He kissed her again, and this time there was joy and celebration in it, the kiss of two people who had found something precious and had no intention of letting it go. They were married in Shoshone 2 weeks later, on a crisp November day, with snow falling gently outside the small church. Penelope wore a simple but beautiful dress of deep blue wool that Caleb had insisted on buying for her, and Caleb wore a new suit that made him look both uncomfortable and devastatingly handsome. The ceremony was small, attended by the few people from town who had become friendly with them, including the kind ticket agent who had directed Penelope to Shoshone in the first place. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Penelope with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. "I love you, Mrs. Donovan," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Donovan," she replied. They had a celebration dinner at the town restaurant, then headed back up to the mountain as the sun was setting. The cabin that had become Penelope's refuge was now her marital home, and her heart was full to overflowing with happiness. That night, Caleb carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that it was unnecessary. He set her down gently in the main room, the fire burning warm and bright in the hearth. "I want to do this right," he said seriously. "I want you to feel cherished and loved, not like this is just some business arrangement." Penelope reached up to cup his bearded face. "I have never felt more loved in my entire life. You make me feel precious, Caleb. You always have." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Penelope melted into his embrace. For all his size and strength, Caleb was infinitely gentle with her, his hands careful and reverent as he slowly undid the buttons of her new dress. They made love by firelight, learning each other's bodies with wonder and tenderness. Caleb was patient and attentive, making sure Penelope felt nothing but pleasure and love. And when they finally came together completely, it felt like coming home, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together perfectly. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Caleb's large bed in the loft, Penelope's head resting on his broad chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "I never thought I would have this," Caleb said quietly, his fingers trailing through her long hair. "A wife, a real home, someone to love who loves me back. After the war, I felt broken inside, like all the good parts of me had died in the fighting. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone in these mountains." "You are not broken," Penelope said fiercely. "You are the strongest, best man I have ever known, and you are not alone anymore. You have me and I have you, and that is all we need." "All we need," Caleb agreed, pulling her closer. Winter set in with a vengeance in December, and Penelope learned what Caleb had meant about mountain winters. The snow piled higher and higher until the cabin was surrounded by a white world that seemed to stretch endlessly. But inside, they were warm and safe and happy. Caleb had prepared well for winter, with a root cellar full of preserved food, a barn stocked with feed for the horses and chickens, and cords of firewood stacked under cover. They could go weeks without needing to venture into town, though Caleb still made the trip periodically when weather permitted to get mail and additional supplies. Penelope discovered a deep contentment in the quiet rhythms of winter life. She cooked and baked, filling the cabin with delicious smells. She sewed and mended, making new curtains and quilts. She read by the fire while Caleb worked on his various projects, everything from tanning hides to carving beautiful pieces of furniture from the wood of fallen trees. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Caleb told her stories of his childhood in Missouri, of learning to hunt and fish from his father, of the simple joys of life before the war. Penelope shared memories of her parents, keeping them alive through her stories. "My mother was an excellent baker," she told Caleb one snowy afternoon while making bread. "She could make pastries so light and delicate they practically floated off the plate. She tried to teach me, but I never quite got the knack for fancy work. I am better with hearty, practical food." "I like hearty and practical," Caleb said, stealing a piece of dough and earning a playful swat. "And I bet you are better at fancy pastries than you think." On Christmas Eve, Penelope woke to find that Caleb had cut down a small pine tree and brought it inside, setting it up near the fireplace. It was decorated simply with strings of popcorn and cranberries that they made together and topped with a star carved from wood and painted white. "I know it is not fancy," Caleb said, looking uncertain, "but I wanted you to have a Christmas tree." Penelope threw her arms around him, deeply moved. "It is perfect. Everything is perfect." They exchanged simple gifts on Christmas morning. Caleb gave Penelope a beautiful jewelry box he had carved himself with intricate mountain scenes on the lid. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. "I thought you might want to put pictures of your parents in it," he said, "to keep them close." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "Caleb, this is so thoughtful. I love it. Thank you." Her gift to him was a new winter coat she had sewn from thick wool, lined with fur from pelts he had tanned. She had worked on it in secret for weeks, and when Caleb tried it on, it fit perfectly. "This is the finest coat I have ever owned," he said, clearly touched. "You made this?" "I did. I wanted you to have something warm for those long days out on the trap lines." They spent Christmas Day in perfect contentment, cooking a special dinner together and then sitting by the fire, Penelope wearing her new locket and Caleb in his new coat despite being indoors, neither willing to take off their treasured gifts. As winter turned to spring, the snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth and the first green shoots of new growth. Penelope was thrilled to see her late-season garden had actually produced some hardy vegetables that had survived under the snow, and she began planning a much larger garden for the coming growing season. In March, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the change in lifestyle or the harsh winter, but when April came and went with the same absence, hope began to bloom in her chest. She waited until she was certain before telling Caleb. One evening in late April, as they were finishing dinner, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby growing here," she said simply. "Our baby." Caleb's eyes went wide, and for a moment he seemed incapable of speech. Then a look of pure joy spread across his face. "A baby? We're going to have a baby?" "We are," Penelope confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "Sometime in October, if my calculations are correct." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "I'm going to be a father. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Caleb said fervently. "You have given me everything, Penelope. A home, a wife, and now a child. I feel like the luckiest man alive." Over the following months, Caleb became almost comically protective. He insisted on doing every heavy task, would not let Penelope lift anything heavier than a plate, and fussed over her constantly. "Caleb, I am pregnant, not dying," Penelope told him with amused exasperation, after he refused to let her carry a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing regular work while expecting babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife carrying my baby," Caleb said stubbornly. "You rest. I will handle it." Penelope found his protectiveness endearing even when it was excessive, and she had to admit that as her pregnancy progressed and she grew larger and more uncomfortable, she was grateful for his help. Caleb made careful plans for the baby's arrival. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving protective symbols into the headboard. He made multiple trips to town to stock up on supplies the doctor recommended. He even arranged for a midwife from Shoshone to come stay with them 2 weeks before Penelope's due date and for 2 weeks after. "I am not taking any chances," he said when Penelope protested that it was excessive. "You and this baby are the most important things in my life. I want the best care possible." Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, arrived in early October, a competent woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies. She examined Penelope thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and likely to have an easy delivery. "This is a strong woman you married," she told Caleb approvingly. "Good hips, good health, good attitude. She will do just fine." Penelope went into labor on a cool October morning, exactly 1 year and 1 month after she had first arrived in Shoshone. The pains started slow and built gradually, giving her time to prepare mentally for what was to come. Caleb was a nervous wreck, pacing and wringing his hands until Mrs. Henderson ordered him to make himself useful by boiling water and keeping the fire going. "Your wife does not need your anxiety," the midwife said firmly. "She needs your calm support." Caleb pulled himself together admirably after that, staying by Penelope's side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement. "You're so strong," he told her over and over. "You can do this. I love you so much." The labor was long but not unusually difficult. As night fell and the pains grew stronger and closer together, Penelope focused on Caleb's face, on his steady presence and unwavering support. And when Mrs. Henderson finally told her to push, she bore down with all her strength, determined to bring their child safely into the world. The baby's first cry split the air just after midnight, strong and healthy and indignant. Mrs. Henderson worked quickly and then placed a small, squirming bundle in Penelope's arms. A boy," the midwife announced with satisfaction. "A fine, healthy baby boy." Penelope looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it almost hurt. Caleb leaned over them both, his face wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "He is perfect," Caleb whispered in awe. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect." "He is ours," Penelope said, reaching up to touch Caleb's face. "Our son." They named him Thomas Henry Donovan, after both their fathers. Thomas was a demanding baby, nursing frequently and sleeping in unpredictable bursts, but Penelope and Caleb rose to the challenge with joy and determination. Caleb was a devoted father, taking on night feedings when Thomas needed soothing, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and staring at him with wonder. When Thomas was a few weeks old, Penelope woke in the night to find Caleb's side of the bed empty. She found him in the rocking chair he had made, holding Thomas against his broad chest and singing softly, his deep voice rumbling with a lullaby from his own childhood. The sight of this big, strong mountain man cradling their tiny son so tenderly made Penelope fall in love with Caleb all over again. As winter set in again, they adjusted to life as a family of 3. The cabin that had once housed a lonely mountain man now rang with baby cries and laughter, with the sounds of a real home filled with love. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Penelope asked Caleb one night as they sat by the fire, Thomas asleep between them in his cradle. The quiet, the solitude. Caleb looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Not for a single second. This, right here, this is everything I ever wanted and never thought I would have. You and Thomas, this family we have built, this is what makes life worth living." The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and deep contentment. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature. 2 years after Thomas was born, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, called Maggie from the start. She had Penelope's brown hair and Caleb's determined chin, and from the moment she could crawl, she followed her father everywhere. Caleb expanded the cabin, adding more rooms to accommodate their growing family. He built furniture with his own hands, each piece crafted with love and care. He taught Thomas to fish and hunt as the boy grew older, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. Penelope maintained their home with pride, growing an extensive garden every summer that provided food for the whole year. She taught Maggie to cook and sew, just as her own mother had taught her. She wrote letters to friends they had made in Shoshone, maintaining connections to the wider world while cherishing their mountain sanctuary. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Penelope with a trip to Shoshone for a proper celebration dinner, leaving the children in the care of Mrs. Henderson, who had become a good friend over the years. At dinner, Penelope looked across the table at her husband, at this strong, gentle man who had taken a chance on her when she had nothing, who had believed in her when no one else would, who had given her a home, a family, a life filled with love and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about how 5 years ago I stood outside a mansion in Denver with my whole world falling apart," Penelope said. "I had nothing, no prospects, no hope. And then I came to Shoshone and met a mountain man who hired me on nothing but my word. That decision changed my entire life." Caleb reached across the table to take her hand. "You changed my life too. You took a rough, lonely man and taught him how to live again, how to love, how to be happy. Everything good in my life started the day you got off that train." "We saved each other," Penelope said softly. "We did," Caleb agreed, "and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat." 3 years later, their family expanded once more with the birth of twin boys, James and Samuel, who kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy and mischief. The cabin was chaos much of the time now, filled with children's laughter and the normal disruptions of family life. But it was a joyful chaos that both Penelope and Caleb treasured. Thomas, now 8 years old, took his role as oldest brother seriously, helping to look after his younger siblings and learning the skills he would need to eventually survive in the mountains himself. Maggie, at 6, was her father's shadow, following Caleb around the property and asking endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how animals knew which plants were safe to eat. Caleb answered every question with patience and obvious love, never too busy to explain things to his curious daughter. And in the evenings, when all the children were finally asleep, he and Penelope would sit together by the fire, sharing the quiet moments that had sustained their relationship from the beginning. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life," Penelope confessed one such evening. 4 beautiful children, a husband I adore, a home that I love. It seems almost too good to be true." "It is real," Caleb assured her, pulling her close against his side. "We worked for this, built it together from nothing. We earned every bit of this happiness." When Thomas turned 12, Caleb began teaching him more advanced skills, taking him on longer hunting trips and showing him how to survive in the wilderness. Penelope worried, as mothers do, but she also recognized that this was part of raising a son in the mountains. Thomas needed to learn to be strong and capable, just as his father was. Maggie, meanwhile, was developing into a skilled horsewoman and tracker, much to Caleb's pride and delight. She had no interest in the domestic arts that engaged Penelope, instead wanting to be outside, exploring the mountains and learning everything her father could teach her. "She is going to be a force of nature when she grows up," Caleb said with obvious pride after Maggie successfully tracked a deer through difficult terrain at age 9. "She already is a force of nature," Penelope replied with a laugh, just like her father. The twins, now 5 years old, were still young enough to be equally at home with either parent, following Penelope around the kitchen one day and helping Caleb with outdoor chores the next. They were inseparable from each other, finishing each other's sentences and getting into double the trouble of a single child. Life in the mountains was not always easy. There were harsh winters when they were snowed in for weeks at a time, illnesses that required desperate trips to town in bad weather, and the constant hard work required to maintain their homestead. But through it all, Penelope and Caleb faced every challenge together, their love for each other and their family providing strength and motivation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb arranged for all the children to stay with families in town so he and Penelope could have a few days alone together. They spent the time reconnecting as a couple, not just as parents and partners in survival, but as the two people who had fallen in love by a fireplace on a cold autumn night. "Do you remember when I told you I was falling in love with you?" Caleb asked as they lay together in their bed, the cabin blissfully quiet without the children. I remember every detail of that night, Penelope said. You said I had made your life worth living again. You have no idea how much those words meant to me. You have no idea how much you mean to me, period, Caleb said seriously. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you got on that train to Shoshone, that you needed a job desperately enough to take a chance on a stranger. I am grateful for every moment we have had together. As am I, Penelope whispered, kissing him. I love you, Caleb Donovan, more now than ever. When the children returned and life resumed its normal chaos, Penelope felt renewed and reconnected to the man she loved. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the deepening of their own bond. Thomas grew into a tall, strong young man who shared his father's love of the mountains and his quiet, thoughtful nature. At 18, he announced his intention to build his own cabin on the northern edge of the property and start his own life, though he would remain close to family. Caleb helped him with the construction, and Penelope filled the new cabin with all the domestic necessities a young man needed. She also gave Thomas advice that had served her well. Judge people by their character and their actions, not by what others say about them, she told him. Your father took a chance on me when I had nothing to recommend me but my word, and it changed both our lives. Be the kind of person who sees the potential in others. I will, Ma, Thomas promised, hugging her tight. Maggie, at 16, showed no interest in settling down, instead spending her days roaming the mountains with the confidence and skill of someone who had grown up in the wilderness. She could track, hunt, and survive on her own, skills that Caleb had made sure she learned alongside her brothers. I want to work as a guide, she announced one day, like Papa does sometimes. I want to show people the beauty of these mountains. Caleb could not have been more proud if he had tried. He helped Maggie establish herself, using his own reputation and connections to get her first clients. Within a year, she was known as one of the best guides in the region, capable and fearless. The twins, James and Samuel, were 14 now and developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. James was interested in medicine, fascinated by how the body worked and healed. Samuel wanted to be a blacksmith, loving the precision and creativity of working with metal and fire. Caleb and Penelope supported both boys in their interests, arranging for James to apprentice with the doctor in Shoshone and for Samuel to work with the town blacksmith. Watching their children pursue their own dreams filled both parents with pride and a bittersweet awareness that their babies were growing up. We did good, Caleb said one evening as he and Penelope sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. 4 healthy, capable children who know how to work hard and live well. That is a legacy to be proud of. We did very good, Penelope agreed. But our greatest accomplishment is not the children, as much as I love them. It is this. Us. A marriage built on mutual respect and love that has lasted through everything life has thrown at us. Caleb pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. 22 years since you walked into my life and turned it upside down. Best 22 years I could have asked for. As they grew older, Caleb's hair and beard became streaked with silver, and Penelope found lines around her eyes from years of laughter and smiles. But their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger, tempered and refined by decades of partnership. When Penelope turned 50, Caleb threw her a surprise party, gathering all their children and their growing number of grandchildren, plus friends from Shoshone. The cabin and yard were filled with people who loved them, celebrating a woman who had come to Idaho with nothing and built a life of richness and meaning. I want to make a toast, Caleb said, raising his glass, to my wife, Penelope. 27 years ago, she arrived in Shoshone dismissed without a reference or a penny, and I hired her on nothing but her word. It was the best decision I ever made. She has been my partner, my love, the mother of my children, and my best friend. Everything good in my life came from taking a chance on her. Here is to many more years together. Everyone drank to that, and Penelope wiped away happy tears, surrounded by the family and life she and Caleb had built together from nothing but faith and hard work. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married a kind woman named Sarah and had 3 children of his own, raising them in the cabin he had built with his father's help. Maggie eventually married a fellow guide, a good man who respected her independence and shared her love of the mountains. The twins both settled in Shoshone, James as the town doctor, and Samuel running the blacksmith shop he had taken over from his mentor. Caleb and Penelope found themselves with an empty nest once more, their cabin quiet, just as it had been in those early days. But instead of lonely silence, it was a peaceful quiet, filled with the contentment of a life well lived. They still worked their land, though not as extensively as before. They still sat by the fire in the evenings, talking or reading in comfortable silence. And they still loved each other with the same intensity, though it had evolved from the passionate romance of youth into something deeper and more enduring. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Penelope took a trip back to Denver, something they had talked about for years but never done. Penelope wanted to see how the city had changed and also to put some old ghosts to rest. They stood outside the mansion where Penelope had once worked, now owned by different people entirely. The Hartwells had long since moved away, and Penelope felt nothing but mild curiosity looking at the place that had once been the site of such humiliation. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, watching her face. "Not a single one," Penelope said firmly. "If that nephew had not made his false accusations, if Mrs. Hartwell had not dismissed me, I never would have gone to Shoshone. I never would have met you. Everything that followed, our whole life together, our children, all of it came from that terrible day. So no regrets at all." They returned to their mountain home with relief, both agreeing that while Denver was interesting to visit, it held nothing for them anymore. Their life was in the mountains, in the cabin they had turned into a home, in the community they had built. As Penelope and Caleb entered their 60s, they began to slow down somewhat, though both remained active and engaged. Their children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren who loved to hear stories about how Grandpa had hired Grandma on nothing but her word, and how they had built a life together in the wilderness. Caleb still hunted, though not as frequently or as far from home. Penelope still maintained her garden, though she accepted help from her daughters-in-law and granddaughters. They still worked together as partners, the rhythm of their collaboration as natural as breathing after so many years. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered for a celebration. The cabin could not hold everyone, so they set up tables outside, and the mountainside rang with laughter and conversation, multiple generations coming together to honor the couple who had started it all. Thomas stood to make a speech, his voice carrying across the crowd. "My parents have taught us all many things over the years. They taught us to work hard, to be honest, to treat others with respect. But the most important thing they taught us was about the power of taking a chance on someone. Pa took a chance on Ma when she had nothing, and Ma took a chance on Pa and a life that must have seemed daunting to a city woman. They built everything we see here, this family and this legacy, on nothing but faith in each other. That's a lesson we should all remember." Penelope squeezed Caleb's hand, both of them moved by their son's words. Looking around at the family they had created, the strong, good people their children had become, the beautiful grandchildren who represented the future, Penelope felt a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. "We did all right, didn't we?" she whispered to Caleb. "We did better than all right," Caleb replied, his voice rough with emotion. "We did extraordinary." As the sun set on the celebration, painting the mountains in their familiar beautiful colors, Caleb and Penelope stood together on their porch, watching their family enjoy the evening. 4 decades had passed since Penelope had arrived in Shoshone, desperate and alone, since Caleb had made the impulsive decision to hire her based on nothing but her word. From that single moment of faith had grown everything they now possessed, not material wealth, though they had enough to live comfortably, not fame or recognition, though they were respected in their community. What they had built was something more valuable. A family rooted in love, a partnership that had weathered every storm, and a life filled with meaning and purpose. "I would not change a single thing," Penelope said softly, leaning against Caleb's still strong frame. "Neither would I," Caleb agreed, wrapping his arm around her. "Every joy, every challenge, every moment, they all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." They stood together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the values they had instilled, the lessons they had taught by example. The mountain man who had taken a chance on a desperate woman with nothing to her name but her word. The dismissed servant who had trusted a stranger and rebuilt her life in the wilderness. Together, they had created a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from having faith when logic suggests otherwise. As darkness fell completely and the celebration continued around them, Caleb and Penelope went inside their cabin, the home they had built together through years of hard work and dedication. The fire was burning warm in the hearth, just as it had been on that first night when Caleb had brought Penelope home. The cabin was cleaner now, filled with the accumulation of 4 decades of living, with photographs on the walls and comfortable furniture and all the touches that made a house a home. They settled into their favorite chairs by the fire, and Caleb reached for Penelope's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Tell me," Caleb said, as he had said countless times over the years, "are you happy?" And Penelope, as she had said countless times before, but always with complete sincerity, replied, "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible." Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, having witnessed the entire arc of their love story from desperate beginning to joyful continuation. Inside, 2 people who had saved each other sat together in perfect contentment, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. Their story had started with nothing but faith and need, a mountain man willing to trust a stranger's word, and a dismissed woman willing to take a chance on an isolated life with a man she did not know. From that improbable beginning had grown a love that had sustained them through decades, through raising children and building a homestead, through harsh winters and beautiful springs, through every challenge and every joy that life had offered. As the fire burned low and they prepared for bed, Caleb and Penelope moved through their evening routine with the synchronized grace of long partnership. They had done this thousands of times, would do it thousands more if fortune allowed, and each time it felt like coming home, like the most natural thing in the world. Lying together in the bed they had shared for 40 years, Caleb pulled Penelope close against his chest, her head tucked beneath his chin just as it had been on their wedding night and every night since. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Penelope replied, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady beat. They fell asleep like that, 2 people who had found each other when both had needed it most, who had built a life of beauty and meaning from the ashes of Penelope's disgrace and the loneliness of Caleb's isolation. Their love story would be told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely circumstances, and that faith in another person can change the world. The mountains kept their silent watch as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, as they had for countless ages, and would for countless more. But inside one small cabin, 2 extraordinary ordinary people slept peacefully, their lives intertwined completely, their hearts beating in synchrony, their story complete and perfect in every way that mattered. They had started with nothing but Penelope's word and Caleb's willingness to believe it. They had ended with everything that truly counted: love, family, a life well lived, and the absolute certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they had needed. It was, in the end, the happiest of endings and the most beautiful of journeys, a testament to the power of faith, love, and the courage to take a chance on the unknown.